Hey everyone, welcome back after this session with Mr. Horst Schulze. Hopefully you enjoyed it and you spent, as I asked you, some time with our sponsors. Now it's time to talk about a topic that everyone at some point needs to be aware of. Let's just put it like that, and it's about pitching ideas, pitching businesses, pitching plans or whatever it is, so that you get an approval or you get a green line or you get whatever you want to get out of this presentation. This process of pitching is something that becoming more and more important, and people are getting more and more interested in the topic. That's why we decided to bring for you someone that knows a little bit, just a bit pitching. His name is David Beckett, and what you are going to be part of right now is his 1012 workshop or session on the topic of pitching. David, welcome to Present to Succeed, and where should let's just do this. 1,000 workshops plus. Great. Let's go.
Great. Thanks very much, Boris. And welcome to everybody. I'm delighted to be here. Been watching some of the sessions earlier on. I thought they were fantastic. So I'd love to share the tools that I've learned over these years. My name's David Beckett. I'm a pitch coach, and I believe that great ideas need a voice. So why do we need great pitches? Well, there's certain big moments in your life which really matter, and you want to get every word, every syllable right. And, you know, quite often when we're in that situation, that important moment, we're also under time pressure. The other person doesn't have much time, whether that is this situation that you see on the screen, or whether that's to a customer, or maybe your boss, maybe the board or your colleagues. Everyone's in a hurry. So we're under time pressure to communicate the value of what we're doing. Now, when we're under time pressure, things can go wrong, but let's face it, time is the most precious commodity that we have. It's the one thing that we can't buy. So everybody is wondering, is this of value for me? If I invest my time in this talk, in this presentation, in this pitch, am I going to get some opportunity? Is something going to be of value for me? So we need to adapt to that and be short and sharp. Now, the challenge is that when you're faced with that time pressure, our brains don't really work very well. If we look at what a pitch is a time-pressured presentation. It's short and sharp. So you don't have the time to tell all the details. We have to get to the essence of the story. Then it's with a clear ask. So a clear ask means we want the people to do something, to take a next step. Many presentations are sharing information or a project update. What we're looking for is people move on to the next step of a persuasion process or a sales process. And finally, a personal edge. Because you don't have the time to tell all the details, it's not completely rational. We need a bit of the non-rational side of it to connect with them as a human being. We need a personal edge that shows, why do we believe in this? Why should they trust us? So a pitch, time-pressured, clear ask, personal edge. But the difficulty is when we're faced with the combination of an audience could be one person, 5 people, 50, 500, when we're in front of an audience and we're under time pressure, our brains fry. We're really not very good at dealing with the time pressure. Our brains melt. So I've been working on a methodology to help people to deal with that time pressure. And I've been doing that over the last nearly 9 years now. And in that time, I coached over 1,500 startups. Startups have to tell their story in 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. So this is where I started to build this methodology. But over the years, this has been adopted by many companies around the world. You know, companies are recognizing, yes, there's a 30-minute PowerPoint and standard presentation that needs to happen, even sometimes longer. But at the beginning of an engagement, we want to hear a short, sharp pitch. Is this of value for me? Should I invest my time in this? And what a lot of those companies want is that their people will pitch in the same way as those startups, to tell their story in 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. And I believe that great ideas need a voice. Now, we've been living in the wildest times of our lives the last couple of years, but maybe they aren't the wildest times of our lives. We've got the future with challenges such as the climate, such as social challenges, political challenges we see all around us. The only way to deal with that is new ideas. But what if you've got an idea and nobody listens? Have you ever had that feeling where you just can't get people to move on to the next step? You've got an idea. You think, if only I could get these people to take action, I think I could make something better around here. So my goal is that nobody has that feeling of I can't be heard. My goal is to give everybody the tools to be able to be heard, be understood, and then be judged not on the pitch, but on the value of the proposition that you bring for the people that you're pitching to. So great ideas need a voice. That's what we're here for today, to help you find your voice for your great ideas. Now, you're going to receive many slides, all the slides and many materials during this workshop. I've packaged everything in a web page for you. It's all free. And I also would encourage you to ask questions. You can ask them in the chat. I'm going to stop on a couple of occasions during this session so that you can have your questions answered. So do feel free to ask questions at any time in the chat, and you'll see this slide. That means I'm going to stop and take a couple of questions. So what I'd like you to do is think about your last presentation. How long was it? Was it 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, maybe even longer? Then ask yourself, could you tell that same story in no time at all? What if people said to you, you've got to tell it in 3 minutes? How would you go about that? What would you tell? What would you leave out? How would you make decisions about that? And I've been building the methodology to help people deal with that time pressure. Now, first, let's just remind ourselves, why do you need to keep it short? You know, when we present, we tend to want to throw all the details in. When we listen to a pitch or a presentation, we're normally convinced by one or two big messages. So how do we get around that? How do we try to adapt our experience as a listener to how we present as well? We need to keep it short. And I have a podcast, it's called The Essential Pitch, and I interviewed Dan Pink. He's written many books, multi-million seller, books such as To Sell is Human and Drive, about communication. Here's what he had to say about why we need to keep things short.
Not everybody agrees with this, but I think that nearly every piece of communication can be made shorter. There is a power in brevity and in concision there, and what it does, as you're saying, David, is that simply starting with the constraints of some kind of brevity forces you to be clearer.
So sometimes it's important to focus down on just the key essence of the story. Take out the details and find the headlines, the key messages that will help them understand what this is mainly about, so that then they can make a decision. Yes, this is a value for us. Let's talk more in details. We're rarely convinced by the seventh detail. We're normally convinced by a big message, a big idea, and a few extra messages around those key ideas. So the biggest macro trend in the world, people have no time. We need to keep it short. Nobody wants it more complex. Nobody wants it to take longer. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to share some tools that will help you with packaging your story and making your pitch in no time at all. So first, let's look at how most people create their pitch. And yes, this is the typical thing. And we've had a couple of sessions on how to prepare that gave you different approaches to simply opening PowerPoint or Keynote or Prezi or any slide software that you use. My advice is to do a few things before you even touch the software. So the advice is stop and don't open PowerPoint or any slide software until you've spent at least 10 minutes thinking about these two things. And the first two things are, who's the audience? What do they care about? And what's the objective? What do I want these people to do? So let's take the first one. Who is your audience? The best way to get a pitch to connect with the audience, to get them to take action, is to tune into their world. You know, communication is what the listener does. So those two words, listener and does. Listener is the audience, does is the objective. That's from Peter Drucker. So what we want to do is get tuned into what do they care about, get into their world. Now, the first step that you can take for any pitch is to take time to research and write down who the audience is for your pitch. What's their biggest challenge? If you said to them, what's your biggest challenge in business right now? What would they say? Then, are they conservative or innovative? Do they want to change the way that they do things or just make things a bit better? You know, this changes the language and some of the content of your pitch. Then, are they purely money focused? Do they want growth or cost saving? Or maybe there's something else, environment, social, and some other issues. If you've got something that's more impact focused, making some kind of impact, and they're interested in that, you'll want to focus on that. But if they're just looking on money, you need to look on the business upside. Are they theoretical or doers? You know, project managers, engineers, they want to know how things work. Sales and marketing people tend to be more focused on, well, what's the next steps? How do I connect with my customers? How can I sell it? And what do they already know? Don't go over old ground. And finally, what might be their biggest objection? What's the reason why they might say, you know, yeah, nice idea, but this will never work because. And if you know that, if you can get to grips with that, you can put it into the pitch, you can put an answer to it and say, you know, you might be thinking such and such, but in fact, this is different because, and blow that objection out of the way before it's even taking hold in their minds. So this would be the first step before creating anything of your pitch. Take time to research and write it down and keep it by your computer. Write it out on some paper, keep it by your computer, and while you're building your pitch, keep referring to it. Is this pitch tuning in to this audience and their challenges? Second thing is, what's their objective? What do you want these people to do as a result of the pitch? And we want action, not just thinking. So what I often hear from people is they say, well, you know, I want them to support what we're doing, or I want them to believe in the product. But those are thinking changes. That's not action. What we want is that they think something different and then take a step. Now, what I find is really useful is to think, well, what do I want them to do? What could they do at 9:30 on a Monday morning? Now, sometimes people say, well, I want them to think in a more innovative way. Well, what would be the result of that if they think in a more innovative way? If you're looking for them to buy into a proposal, then they buy into it, they like it, now what? So those things could be that they plan a follow-up meeting or agree to a follow-up meeting. They give an introduction within the organization. You need to connect with somebody else in a different department. They write an email and say, hey, I saw this great pitch. We need to get connected. Or perhaps they assign resources. You need help from another department in your company, and somebody needs to help you for 20% of their time. Or perhaps you want sponsorship from the board for one of your ideas. What's the objective? Make it as concrete as you can. Now, sometimes you have a long-term objective and sometimes you have a short-term. Long-term could be, we need a budget of $500,000, but the first next step would be a 1-hour follow-up meeting, a working session with these two people. So focus on what the first next step is. So the action step here, once again, before you touch the software, is write down what you want the audience to do as a result of the pitch and focus on action, not just thinking differently. All right, Boris, would you like to see if there's any questions in the chat? And while you're picking that up, let me just share one very common question before Boris picks up on the questions in the chat. One common thing that I get asked is, well, what if you don't know about the audience? You know, it's nice to say, well, tune into the audience, but what if you don't know exactly who they are or what they're interested in? And my advice is to do the opposite of what most people do. What most people do is fill the pitch with as much information as possible and try to extend the time so that we can sort of throw various details at them and hope that some of them will stick. My advice is do the opposite. Keep it short, tell them the headlines, and then ask, what's on your mind? Do you want to know more about the product or the market or the problem we're solving, or what our track record is, or something about the team? What would you like to know more about? And then you can get into a Q&A. That will help you to get more focused on what they're actually interested in. Any questions showing up, Boris?
David, so far we don't have them in the chat. I think it was a little bit unexpected for the audience to bring up the questions right now. Let's wait a little, but sure. I have one that I believe will add a lot to exactly what you mentioned around the audience. A lot of people probably, you have heard them saying that I don't know the audience or I cannot know the audience, whatever, right? They come up with so many excuses of why it is not possible, etc. However, because I started, I don't know if you were here for the introduction of the conference, meaning those first 10 minutes we had, but what we did last year was to analyze all of the feedback from our participants, and there was one saying from someone that truly hit me, because many of us who are in this presentation space, a lot of times we say, hey, know your audience, know your audience, know your audience. And there was a comment last year that the person mentioned that they understand that they need to know their audience. So that is clear to them, but they continued that sentence and said, so how do I do it?
Sure.
And then there was a continuation. Just let me go with it because I think it's interesting. Once they asked, so how do I do it? And then they said, and once I find the information, so what?
Sure. So there's two things. Firstly, the reason I give a checklist is because I think everybody knows, yes, I should think about the audience, but what should I think? So I give the checklist of, for example, what's their challenge? Are they focused on money? Are they interested in process? These are the kind of actual things that you can think about. And even if you don't know exact answers, just going through that process will take you out of the internal brainy process, which we tend to go through when we build pitches and presentations, and take you out into their world. And you might just ask a colleague if it was important. Maybe ask a colleague, do you know anything about these people? I want to know if they're thinking this way or that way. That's the first thing. Second thing is LinkedIn is the obvious place. And I've rarely found it difficult to find something about the people that I'm meeting with on LinkedIn. Normally it's a pretty good bet in business that somebody will be there. And, you never know. They might have a blog. They might have something which is nothing to do with work. Maybe they're interested in barbecuing or, windsurfing. But that might just give you a connection that you can bring into your presentation. So that brings me to the next part. So what? So I think the audience and the objective, the audience part tends to influence the setup of the pitch. And the middle tends to be quite similar. Because we have a solid part, we will be presenting a product or a project. It tends to be something that we talk about a lot. But the opening is how you set it up for the audience, how it matches what's happening for their world. Then the objective is about the end of the pitch where you want to ask, so what we'd like you to do is, or what we want to arrange is. So there's a concrete outcome. So the opening, or the first 10, 15% of a pitch tends to be influenced by what you know about the audience. And the last part is influenced by the objective. So again, I think it's about tuning into their world. It's about adapting the language a little bit. And if I give you one concrete example, innovative or conservative, if people are conservative, you talk about, what we're going to do is build on what you already created. If people want to if they're more innovative, you talk about how we're going to revolutionize the way things are done. It changes the language. Yep. So these are a couple of ways to look at what does it mean to think about the audience? I recognize people know that, but here's some practical, actual things that people can do to turn that into their pitch.
Do you want to take one more or should we move on?
Yeah, let's do one more.
There is one from Stoyan who is asking, or his reply is, yes, I do have a question. And so the question is the following. Outside of the realms of startups or sales, how do we go about regular business reporting?
Sure. So I've experienced this myself. I used to work for Canon. I was went from marketing assistant to country director across 16 years. So I did many, many, many of these reports. And I think the starting point is always who's in the room. So for example, I also had situations where you had legal, financial, and marketing in one room. How do you adapt to those three? That's really challenging, but you have to find something which is interesting for each of these three people. Equally, you can't tell lots and lots of details about each of those three functions' interests. So that's where I recommend give them all something that's relevant for them, but then cut it short, make sure there's time to find out what do they want to know. The magic question is really I've got more details. What would you like to know more about? And if you have a 30-minute presentation time and you tell them I've got a 10-minute presentation so that I can take your questions afterwards, no one's going to say, why is it only 10 minutes? People will be delighted. They love being able to ask the questions that's on their mind. So we're afraid of not filling the time, but actually what we really want to do is find out what's on their mind and answer that. And then if we don't know, of course that's awkward, but then at least we know and we can go away and sort that out. So my advice would be for typical business reporting, typical business presentations, think through who's in the room. And if you've got a diverse audience, shorten it down. If you don't know that much about them, shorten it down, get into a conversation, find out more of what they know or what they want to know, but keep the backup detail ready to go.
Okay, let's move on with your part now, and then I'll come back to the questions because there are some.
Excellent. All right. So now that we've done the audience, the objective, the question might be, can I open PowerPoint now? And the answer, unfortunately, is not yet, because we still need to make a decision about what we're going to say. Now, this might seem odd because most people organize their thoughts, or they say they organize their thoughts in PowerPoint. That doesn't really work. And we've seen that also in a couple of other sessions. So I'm not going to talk too much about this process, but the one thing I will tell you is the best way to build it that I know is using post-it notes to build your pitch storyline. And that means brainstorming the few things that you can talk about in a pitch. I'll give you a tool called the pitch canvas, which will help you with this. And this is about getting out of your head all the things you could possibly say in the pitch. What's the problem you're solving? Solution you've created? What's unique about it? What's the track record? What is it that you need from these people? Is it a sale, a purchase? Is it approval? What's the next step? And why do you believe this is a great idea? Who are the people behind it? And so on. So these would be everything that you could say. Then you take a step back. You think, who's the audience? What's the objective? And how long have I got? And work out what the big topics are and the key messages. So the first rough brainstorm might look a bit like this. And ideally what you do is extract the key messages and build a storyline that looks like this. And the great thing about this kind of storyline is that you can see the beginning, middle, and end. And you can see if it flows. You can never do that in any slide software. So you get to see whether this works for you, and you can test it out. You can verbalize it. Now, rather than go in a lot of detail of this, because there's a very short version of what I normally explain in workshops, I've actually packaged this up. Now, the tool to use for this brainstorm is called the pitch canvas. And I've created a video which walks you through how to use post-its and the pitch canvas to build your pitch. That's the process of building your pitch. And rather than go through all of that now, there's a video on the webpage. It's less than 8 minutes, and it will walk you through step by step how to do it. And deciding which topics should be in your winning pitch. What should you talk about? What should you not talk about? Because you're under time pressure. You can't tell everything. That's all about who's the audience, what's the objective, and how long have you got? This decides everything. It always helps you make decisions. Should I say this or should I say that? If you keep referring to the audience and the objective, this will help you. Then here's what we're not going to do. When we talk about the topics that we're going to talk about, here's what we're not going to do. But most pitches are like this. So here's our product, and here's some more about our product, and here's some more information about our product. Any questions? This is what we're not going to do. A pitch that talks to people, that speaks to what they're interested in is, look, we know how the challenges that you're facing, that your customers are facing, we've created a solution which helps you and the customers reach their goals. Here's our track record. Here's the team behind it. And this is why I believe this is a great idea. So let's talk. What would you like to know more about? That's a completely different pitch to here's what we do. So we need to get out of that, here's the product, and more into we recognize what's happening in the world. Here's how we help you reach your goals. And the pitch canvas has various topics which show you, which walk you through that. Things like the problem you're solving, the solution you've created, what's unique, your success so far, what's in it for them, and so on. So you can have a look at this. As I say, it's all completely free. It's all completely open and available. And let me just walk you through 3 of the key elements of every great pitch that you will find in the pitch canvas. And the first one is really the most important of any pitch. What's the problem you solve? Now, this is the why of the product. And I'm sure most of you have heard the Start With Why story from Simon Sinek. And this is starting with why. You see, if you start talking about your product and you talk about the technology or how it's made up and what it does, we don't know why you've built it. What we want to know is why is it there? And the why is the problem you solve. Now, the challenge is to make it human. Now, let me give you an example. The pain in a human way compared to technical way. So I coached a team that had a parking app, and what they didn't do was say, parking's quite difficult. So we've created an app and uses Internet of Things. And recently we've adapted it to go on the blockchain and uses augmented reality. So that also enables people, connecting to Open API. You get the picture. This is a technology description, and we're completely lost. We don't know why that's of value. However, what they really say is, can you imagine, on average in cities like Amsterdam, it takes people over 20 minutes every time they look for a parking space. Now, what does that mean? It means that while they're driving around in circles, looking for that elusive parking space, the family is sitting down to have dinner without them again. Now, what that does is it quantifies the problem. So 20 minutes every day, and it describes the loss of experience, missing out on time with family. Now, of course, in business, it could be a little bit different. So let me give you another example of this. I coached a team that was in a large company, and they were running a project to take 6 data systems and make it one. And they'd been working on it for 2 years. They were coming to the pitch, to the board for more money. And I said, well, why are you doing this? And they said, because we need 1 system, not 6. I said, well, why is that important? Maybe 6 is good. I don't know. Why are you doing why? And we went round in circles a little bit. And at a certain moment, I said, look, you're a consultant. You want this tool to be used by consultants. Why do you need it? Excuse me. And he said, I'll tell you why. Because on a Monday morning, I get on the train, I have an hour commute, and I can't do any work on the way because none of the data is mobile. I can't access it on my mobile phone. And I get to the office, and can you believe it? I've got 2 computers. I have to log into all these different systems. The data from this one doesn't match that one. And every week I spent at least 3 or 4 hours reconciling the data, and it drives me crazy. And there's hundreds of us in the company doing exactly the same thing. It's costing the company thousands. And I said, well, pitch that. You're not pitching, we need to go from 6 systems to 1. What you're pitching is the frustration, the lost time, the lost money for the company. That's a problem that people want to have solved. Nobody cares about systems. People care about frustration, time, money. So if you can make it human, think about the lost time, the more cost, complex steps, irritation, lost customers, bad reputation. That tends to be if you're in a B2B situation. Now, what's also important is to be specific, put a number on it. And this matters because if you say things like it wastes a lot of hours or they have to make a lot of calls, our brain doesn't really like these general statements. Our brain says, really, how many? You say, wastes a lot of hours, have to make a lot of calls. How many is a lot? However, if you say it can take up to 72 hours or they have to make up to 15 calls, our brains like to get fingernails on those quantified statements. And so we feel like it's got some research behind it. We feel like it's solid and we're ready to hear the solution. So be specific, put a number on it. I want to give you a couple of examples. Here's another example. It's what I would call the gap in desire and supply, where you describe what people want, but what they're actually being given and how you fill the gap. Now, this is a company called Cyan Reef. They have an impact investing platform, and they talk about why is it that people don't invest their money in ventures that create impact on environment and social issues.
People have a clear ambition to make a difference and invest their money with positive purpose. In fact, 83% of investors want to invest with impact, but only 23% actually do. Why? Because investing is difficult and regular people don't have access, tools, or guidance to do this right. This is why we created Cyan Reef, a digital advisor for impact. We made it possible for people to make great financial decisions while making a positive difference.
So this is really different to saying, here's something that we built, or here's a platform that we built, and describing the tech behind it. Instead, he describes why it matters. 83% of people want to do this, only 21% do. Why the gap? Because of this, we've solved it. And then we're in. We want to know, okay, tell me more. And so this is a good way to think about how you can create that interest in your pitch. The pain is really the starting point of any great pitch. I would even argue that any business presentation is generally about solving a problem. So even if you're in an ongoing project, it's good to remind people of why you're doing it. What's the problem that you're trying to solve? And what's that problem resulting in right now? So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions about the pain, and there were 1 or 2 other questions that were coming up earlier on, Boris. So if you want to pick up on those,
Yep.
or anything to do with this one, feel free to raise them.
I definitely can come up with, I would say, a dozen dozens of questions now. There are quite some. You may want to jump back afterwards after the session and try to reply to all of them, because we're for sure not going to be able to do all of them. However, I really liked the one that I saw here from Melina. There is a question from Melina that I think is one that we need to answer. Should we change something in a pitch if we know in advance that half of the audience is against the idea we are presenting?
I would say yes. And what you can do, you've basically got two choices. You either ignore their objection and hope that you can persuade them. But the problem is that objection is what I call the hanging question. The hanging question is something that sits right in front of somebody's face and their ears, and they can't hear and see anything until that hanging question is solved. So let me give you an example. I coached a team once that it has a solution for payment by facial recognition. Now, my wife is really, really careful about her digital data, her digital identity. So if you talk about you can pay using facial recognition, you don't need your phone, you don't need anything. There's a scanner at the desk, and you can pay with that. It's really quick. If you don't say anything about her privacy and her data protection, there's no chance she'll listen to anything, because the thing that's going through her mind is, what about my data? What about my data? What about my data? This will not work because my data is not protected. So the way to get around that is early in the pitch. If the person has got the smarts to know this is the objection, they say early in the pitch, you might be wondering about privacy. Well, we've taken care of that. And then you give a rock solid case for why that is overcome. Now, of course, sometimes you have objections which are difficult to overcome, and that's more a product problem than necessarily a pitch problem. But I think it's best to get problems or objections on the table and try to deal with them face to face, rather than try to ignore them, because otherwise people can't come along with you. If you put it on the table and say, you might be wondering such and such, here's how we see we can get over that problem. And then you could say at the end, I'm really open to discussing whether that solves any of the concerns that people have. Then you have a good chance that some people will come with you and the others will talk to you about it.
Yeah. Do you want to get one
So I
more?
hope that helps.
Yeah,
Please.
there is. Trust me, there are questions. So Nikolai is asking, what is the upper and lower limit of pitch time duration? Is there such at all?
Yeah, I think it depends on a number of things, but I've experienced that. Like, for example, if you're given a 30-minute meeting, the temptation is to prepare a 20-minute presentation and think, well, we'll have 10 minutes Q&A. But the fact is, the presentation, firstly, there'll be some tech difficulties at the start. The presentation will overrun, and before we know it, there's been no time to deal with Q&A. My suggestion is focus more towards a pitch. Now, pitch generally is in that kind of 1 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute situation. But I think there's other situations. If you're in the creative industry, for example, you have longer pitches. I've even been coaching a big consultancy company to do 3-hour online pitches, which sounds absolutely horrible. And to be honest, in some cases they are, but we try to make it at least absorbable. The short version answer to your question is normally around 5 minutes is a typical max for a pitch. My company's best 3 minutes. That's a very common length, 3 minutes. And I think it depends on the situation. What are they expecting? What's the understanding? If they asked you for detail, or if they asked you, give us a quick introduction, then I would say go for 5 minutes and get into the Q&A. Find out what's on their mind. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah. One more, or are we moving forward? How do you want to go? Because we have 10 more minutes. Okay, let's do one more then. I left the tablet, but I remember this one because I think you somehow answered it, but let's go back at it for a second, because there was a question from someone asking you if you are able to run a survey of the audience to understand what they're interested in and what they care about, would you do it?
Yes, and actually I've done that. Excuse me, just give me a moment.
Sure, no worries.
An online, just give me a moment, hold on.
Stay with us, everyone. This is live. No recordings. David is back now.
So I coached a large company on online presentation in the early days of COVID. And we did a survey in advance to find out what's really bothering people. And it was really useful because I thought people were worried about the tech. It turned out that actually the number one thing they were bothered about was engaging with the audience. So I learned something that I knew that was something on their minds, but I just skipped a load of the tech stuff because people were not worried about that. It was 2 or 3 months into using the new tools. So people were sort of getting used to it, but they were really bothered by not connecting with the audience. So I would say, if you've got any opportunity to find out what's on their minds and recycle that into the presentation or the pitch, this is dynamite, actually.
All right.
All right.
I think we can go and move forward.
Yeah, 2 more pieces of what's the essential parts of any pitch. The second one is what's in it for them. And how does your proposition match their strategy and their ambitions? You know, nothing beats strategy. So if you know what's their strategy, what they're trying to achieve, instead of saying, here's what we do, you can tune into how you help them reach those goals. So not here's what we do, but instead we talk about, we recognize your goals. Here's what we do to help you reach them. Now, that company I mentioned earlier on, who's doing these great long pitches for IT infrastructure projects, they were pitching to a customer who had a net zero by 2030, if only it was 2020, by 2030 goal. And they presented a green IT framework. And they showed, we have a green IT framework, and they explained all how it worked. And somewhere in 10-point text at the bottom, there was something about this matches your goal of net zero by 2030. We changed that pitch and made that the key message of the story, because that was the thing that mattered. Not how does this green IT framework work or the technical solution, but how does it help them reach their goals? So we turned it upside down. This green IT solution helps you achieve your goals of net zero by such and such a time. And then why? Because it does this, this, and this. So I think being clear on what's in it for them is really the goal. And it seems obvious, but taking time to think, what is their strategy? What are their goals? And keeping that by you when you're building your pitch to make sure you're tuning into that. And the third thing, before we wrap up, is why you? What's your personal motivation to offer this proposition? So there's a lot of rational stuff you can talk about. The problem you're solving, solution you've created, your track record. You'll find all this on the pitch canvas. But the last one on the pitch canvas, the last topic is why you? Now, this really matters. I've interviewed hundreds of people who listen to pitches in companies, in all sorts of industries. They all say the same thing. I want to hear the rational stuff, but I want to see the enthusiasm from the person who's pitching. If you're not enthusiastic, why should I be? Is their message. So we have to ask ourselves, what makes you excited about your proposition? What is it that makes you shine? You know, your enthusiasm really counts. And let's just take this a little bit further. And a while ago, I interviewed this guy, and he was talking about investing for startups, but I think what he said is very relevant for anybody in business. I'm going to play it to you a couple of times because it's very short and he speaks fast. So let me just play what he said about enthusiasm and energy when it comes to pitching and presenting.
And investors invest in conviction. So if you don't have energy and passion, we're probably not going to invest.
So let me say that again, play that again, and then I'll tell you what he said and share how that adapts.
And investors invest in conviction. So if you don't have energy and passion, we're probably not going to invest.
So he was talking about investors and startups. Investors put money into conviction. So if you don't have energy and passion, we're probably not going to invest. Now, I would say that applies with customers. Customers put money into conviction. If you don't have energy and passion, they're probably not going to buy. Now, of course, there's lots of things that influence whether people buy stuff, whether that's companies or individuals. But finally, that energy, that passion for what you do can often be a trigger for somebody to make a decision. But the thing is, it's not that easy. We're not all that outgoing, hey, it's amazing kind of person. So how do we do that? Well, the fact is, you don't have to be energetic and passionate about everything. The founder of the biggest accelerator in the world, when he gives pitch advice, Paul Graham, He says, at which moment in your pitch will you be animated? At which moment? What he means is there needs to be something along the way where you shine. You see, when you talk about something that you're excited about, you become animated naturally. What he means by that is your eyes light up, your face lights up, you start smiling. If you talk about something that you're excited by, you will find that you can't help but be enthusiastic. Everyone's got a different way of showing enthusiasm. Some people are more extrovert, some people more introvert, but people can feel it when you are enthusiastic. So the task is to find something that you are excited about. You know, I used to work in the fax department in Canon back in the late 90s and early 2000s. Oh yes, exciting times. You know, fax machines, very exciting. But I had a passion. My passion was to make the best team in Canon. That was my goal. The product was almost secondary. What I was excited about was creating a team that worked together, that knew how they were working as a team. They knew what each other was doing. They avoided overlaps. They didn't have to like each other, but they needed to have the same goals, the same ambitions for the team. And I would be the oil between the cogs of that engine. And sometimes we had the best team in Canon. Sometimes we reached it. It was always my passion. So sounds like there's an alarm just running by. So that was my goal. What's your passion? What's the thing that makes you excited about your business? And I've made a video about this. It's also on the webpage called Put Passion into Your Pitch. And that will help you understand this idea of putting something that excites you into your pitch. Now, I'm going to take you to the tools that are in the webpage. And then we'll wrap up with maybe one last question if we have time. That is the link. It's best3minutes.com/PTS. So best3minutes.com/PTS. I'll put it in the chat a little bit later. And there you'll find the slides from this workshop. You'll find 3 pitch tip cards, steps to preparing your winning pitch, mistakes to avoid, and how to manage your nerves. You'll also find an online pitch course, about 30 minutes of video broken up into 12 chapters, walks you through the steps to build the pitch. It's completely free. So just get access to it. It's there for you. I also have an app. It's called Pitch Professional. You find it on iOS and Android. Also useful stuff about the pitch canvas. There's some example pitches and a lot of pitch tip videos in there. Do check out my podcast. It's called The Essential Pitch. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'd love to connect with you. So Boris, over to you. And let's see if there's one last question, if we have time for one more.
Yeah, we have time for one more. There are more than just one, but let's go with one that was probably one of the first ones. And it's because in pitching, everyone talks a lot about using the sticky notes, and you explained why that is a very good idea. The fact that you can see everything, the fact that you can, but there was a case from Susan who was asking, hey, what about the electronic version of Post-it notes? What is your take on them?
So there's a couple of tools. There's Miro and Mural. Both of these work pretty well. I've seen them work. I think they're especially good for collaborating. If you're in different locations, that's a great way to do it if you need to collaborate. My view is there is nothing quite like the most primitive way of writing stuff down and getting your ideas out of your head, and that is writing down on paper. We've been doing it for millennia, actually. And there's various research about it being more sticky. Now, some people they've perfected the art of mind mapping and so on. So if you have a software that works, by all means use that. But my preference is take out any of the tools, just concentrate on the content, write stuff down, whether that's on Post-its or sketching things out. What matters is to take your thoughts out of your head, take a look at them, organize them, and then build a storyline, effectively prototype your pitch, and then build the slides. That way, you will save yourself a load of time and you'll really raise the quality. You'll be much clearer on what the story is. So the fewer tools, the better is my recommendation. But if there's a piece of software that you use a lot and you're very proficient with, by all means do that. And especially for collaboration, Mural and Miro.
Yeah, actually, the person that asked about us was referring to exactly those tools. That is one of them. So right on spot here, obviously. David, we are right on time. We are right on time.
Great.
Thanks for everything that you shared, and thanks for all of the free resources that you mentioned. Hopefully people will take them in mind and utilize them. However, I'm going to ask you to jump in the chat and in the Q&A area to interact with the attendees even further and even more, because there are some questions to you that we were not able to process and go through. So please join and answer the questions that remained in the chat. And yet again, thank you so much for joining.